For you to do is, in your mind's eye, get a quality about yourself that is so different than most of the rest of the people around here. Think about that thing that is your essence, the thing that makes you stand out. Let's go to the extreme. Let's think about a quirk, okay? One of your quirkiest quirks, because I'm going to want you to share it. Getting ready for this? All right? I want the quirkiest quirk to share. Okay, some of you are going, I'm not going to do this, all right? And you're not going to do it because for some of you, you spent your whole life trying to hide that quirk. You don't want anybody to know about that. And for other of you who are really comfortable sharing, you just have so many quirks. You don't even know which one you're going to want to share as your quirkiest of quirks. Now, that would be wrong, wouldn't it, really, to make you in a group of strangers just share your quirkiest of quirks? That would be really wrong. But you know what I've come to learn as a brand guy? Is that we somehow, in the world of brands, whether it's corporate brands like Mercedes-Benz or Starbucks, or whether it's individual brands like what we try to do when we post on Facebook and create a brand, or how we try to create a brand of ourselves inside of a company, that no matter what those brands are, individual or corporate brands, we're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to fit in, but stand out. We want to be like other people, but a little different than everyone else. We want to be like them enough to be loved by everyone and different enough not to freak out the very people that we want to bring to us. At the end of the day, brands are nothing more than what people say about us when we're not around. And we'd like for them to say that we belong, but we have something magical and unique and special to give to the world such that people will come to us and cut through the clutter. Now, how do we find that balance between the sameness and the differentness? How much of each should we have? Now, I'll tell you, the sameness is easy. It is so easy to try to look the same as everybody else. And lots of people do it. They create a certain kind of look that looks like everybody else's certain kind of look. Brands do the same thing. They benchmark off each other. They see what somebody great is doing, and then they try to do it themselves, and we wonder why we have such a sea of sameness across the brand landscape and across individual brands. So how do we get through that? How do we actually find something about ourselves that's different? Well, let me give you a corporate brand as an example that is really different than most corporate brands. They are a brand called Zappos. Now, many of you may know Zappos because they have spent a lot of time being successful selling shoes online. Now they've become a massive online retailer purchased by Amazon for about $1.2 billion. Now, how did this tiny little upstart group of people who were trying to sell shoes online turn into a $1 billion enterprise? It was pretty simple. They were just a group of guys who were very much alike each other. And then they start bringing in other guys and female friends of theirs who were like them, and they start building this brand that said we could actually sell shoes online for full price. Go figure. Shoes online. Come on. I mean, sevens aren't sevens. Brown isn't always brown. How do you trust that if you send money to somebody, they're going to send you the right shoes, right? But they figured out that if we were all alike in our purpose and our commitment to wow customers, we could do something remarkable. And so this very unique group of people kept growing and growing a business until one day they got so big that the founders could no longer interview every new hire. And as that point hit, then headhunters would bring in people, recruiters would bring in great talent, but the people they brought in, as talented as they were so different. They were really weird compared to what Zappos was like, right? These people were different than the Zappos folks. So as a result of that, the CEO of Zappos, Tony Hsieh, decided that he had to figure out a way to look inside to figure out what made Zapponians what they were. Well, how did he do that? Now, if you're a normal company, the way you look inside is to go to a retreat, and you have a facilitator, and you put up all kinds of words on the walls from other great brands, and you say, what do we want to be? And then you claim a word. Enron claimed integrity, okay? So, but in truth, that's not the way you figure it out. You have to go in yourself. How do you go in yourself? Well, Tony Hsieh said to all of his people, he said, what makes us different? What's our quirk? What's our weirdness? Share it, please. And he heard some really interesting things. The people at Zappos said, you know what makes us great? We're a little weird. We're not a lot weird. It's not freak you out weird, but we're a little weird. And if you're not weird enough, you shouldn't work here. Oh, by the way, we're humble. We're really a quiet little gentle brand here. We're not out shouting and screaming. We're humble. And in fact, the CEO, a billionaire CEO, has an open cubicle in the middle of the building. That doesn't happen in most of corporate America. They are humble, and we create family spirit. And that was the message of Zappos. We are those things. And that became the filter by which they looked at every other single person. You know, it's fabulous if you take that time to look inside of yourself for your personal brand, to really look at what makes you unique and special. What is your brand essence? If you do, you rise above the clutter of confusion and mystery about who am I. And if you do it, you have an opportunity to live into it. And the living into it is probably even harder than the defining it. Do you have the courage to be as different and special and unique as you were created? Do you have that kind of courage? You know, it's hard to have that courage. And sometimes to get that kind of courage, what you have to do is the complete opposite of what you did to figure out who you are. If you have to look in to figure out who you are, guess what you have to do to sustain a focus on the purpose of your life? You have to look out. You have to look out to the horizon line of your life to define, with all this stew of talents and greatness that is in me, how do I courageously express some of those unique qualities alongside of all the sameness with the world? How do I let myself express that? And what is that going to mean if I did? Looking out to the horizon line of your life is something that the great author John Maxwell said when he said, in the end of all of our lives, we're going to be remembered in one sentence. Write it now. Think about that. One sentence, how tragic. That might be the summary line of our lives. But if that were true, what would your sentence be today? I call that sentence a legacy statement. A legacy statement says, this is what I want my life to be about. This is how I want to be known when people aren't around. This is the impact I want my life to have, not only for short-term success, but for significance of impact on the people around me. Wow, what would that mean? What is that significance? So I ask lots and lots of people who I get to work with in these incredible brands what they want their significance to be. I asked Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, what he wanted his impact to be. He said, I want to create a lasting brand that elevates lives one cup at a time. Yeah. When the company was sinking into an abyss, Howard had to go back and be CEO again, reminding people they're not in the coffee business serving people, they're in the people business, uplifting lives and serving coffee. I happen to work with a guy by the name of Johnny Yokoyama. Johnny owns a little fish market in Seattle where they throw fish and have an animated experience. I said, Johnny, what do you want your legacy to be? And he said, well, you know, I started my life as a Yokoyama in a time in history when people with our last names, Japanese Americans, were rounded up and put in internment camps. My family lived behind barbed wire in a tar paper hut. I started with nothing. And I came to realize that I could create a brand that people recognize around the world. I try to teach my people that I live a legacy, that they can do greatness from wherever they stand, even if it's in front of dead, cold, slimy fish. No matter where you stand, you can make a significant difference. Now, this is all about legacy. We can talk about Johnny Yokoyama or Howard Schultz, any of these really important people, but what about us, like ordinary folk? What about us? Can we define a legacy and live into it, and what impact will that give us anyway? Well, I wasn't big on this legacy thing. It sounds pretty audacious, if you know what I mean, a legacy. Like, who am I to have a legacy? But you know what? We're going to have a legacy whether we design it or it happens by default. It's either going to be a huge legacy because we created it as such, or it's going to be this tiny little thing of minor significance. So why not claim a big legacy now? Now, I told you I was not all into this legacy, and I was really actually late to the game on the legacy. It wasn't until I met this woman. Her name is Nora. Now, Nora dated me for a year, which was 51 weeks longer than anyone had ever dated me before. And Nora essentially said to me, look, if we've dated a year now, is this going anywhere, right? I mean, are we going to do anything great together, or are you going to let your individual brand just go wherever it goes and I'll do my individual brand? And I said, no, I'd rather just have another date if that's okay with you. But that was not what she was looking for. She wanted something bigger. And ultimately, we agreed to get married. We agreed to have kids, and we defined a legacy statement for our marriage, and it was that we were going to raise 2 kids, and those 2 kids were going to give more to the world around them than they took from the world. That was our legacy. It seemed big to us, probably to you, it's like, big deal. But to me it was big, and to Nora it was big, and we fought for that. And I'll tell you, to sustain the focus on the unique talents that each of us brought to that relationship, to try to create 2 kids who would give more to the world and take, that was hard, and particularly in adolescence. When my kids were teenagers, we had the spawn of Satan living in our household. We were so far off on our legacy, but somehow, some way, my kids moved on. My son graduated from college. I never saw that coming. He graduated from college. He actually had a job, and he got a paycheck. That was a great and joyous surprise. He was living in Seattle, Washington, recording bands. He had a sound engineering degree. He was living the dream. And we decided it's a great time for us to move from Colorado, where we lived our entire life, move to the state of Florida so we could sail and have a joyous life. And 6 weeks after moving, my daughter, Fiona, and my wife, myself, moving to Florida, 6 weeks after we arrived here in this magical land of Florida, my wife was in the intensive care unit at St. Anthony's Hospital with metastases of her breast cancer. Her breast cancer had moved to her brain, her heart, her liver, her lungs, and I had to call Andrew. I said, Andrew, sorry to interrupt this great job of yours, and I don't need you to do anything dramatic right now, my friend, but at some point, you're going to have to come home, take some family leave, and be here for the family. And he said, got it, Dad, I'll definitely do that. Next day, I get a call from Andrew. He said, I'm in the airport here in Florida. I said, Andrew, what are you doing in the airport in Florida? He said, I quit my job. I said, you did not quit your job. I put you through college. You did not quit your job. He said, no, Dad, I quit my job because I wanted to move home. I said, Andrew, this is not home. You've never lived in Florida. Your home is where your job is. You know what? Andrew said to me, Dad, no. My home is where my mom is. And in that moment, Nora's legacy showed up. Shows up all the time with Andrew and Fiona. It showed up for Andrew in the end days of Nora's life when he had come back to Florida without a job, and he decides, despite his college degree, he's going to get trained as a certified nursing assistant so he could clean bedpans. And in the final hours of my wife's life, it was Andrew who would pick her up off the toilet and put her in her bed. It was in that moment that I knew we had created at least some hope for a child who was giving more to the world than he took away. You know, I don't know what your brand is. I don't know what those qualities are that make you amazingly great. But I knew, and I do know, that it's time, right now, it's time to look inside. Because we don't know how much time we have. We don't know how many more days we have. Nora certainly didn't. It's time to look inside for what makes you great. It's time to look outside for the purpose you want your life to have. Create that legacy statement. Because if you don't, you may never live the fullness of the legacy you were given. Thank you.